Collection, Volume 1 by Teace Snyder. Super Nobody. When I was growing up, my favorite superhero was Superman. He could do anything he wanted and have anything he wanted, but he still chose to spend his time helping people. He gave me hope, something to dream about. I wanted to be just like him. Actually, that's not true. He always seemed a little pompous. What I really wanted was to be able to do the things he could do. I realized later, as I lay in the dumpster below our building's fire escape, that Superman was super because he was born that way. But I wasn't. I really couldn't fly. And in retrospect, I was lucky to have survived my 7-story fall into the trash I'd thrown out that morning. Jumping was easy, and it was living in the real world that scared me. So my next favorite superhero was Spider-Man. He wasn't born with special powers. They came to him by chance. And I liked the idea that normal people could become something more. But of course, when I tried microwaving my snake so that it would turn radioactive and bite me, my mother went ballistic. She forbade me from ever having pets or reading about superheroes again. She even sent me to a child psychiatrist to try and get to the bottom of my obsession. The shrink said I developed my love for glorified Supermen to compensate for my lack of a father figure. My mother didn't send me back for a second session. Batman was my next favorite hero. Technically, he wasn't a superhero because he didn't have any superpowers. And as far as anyone could tell, he was just an ordinary guy screwing around in bulletproof leather, but he still managed to help people. He still made a difference with or without super strength and agility, and in my mind, that meant I had a chance too. It meant there could be something more to growing up than just getting older. I could be a superhero too. No, you can't, Brad protested, dipping one side of his fry into ketchup and the other side into cheese whiz. Superheroes don't come out of middle schools in Jersey. Who says? I snapped, flipping through one of the library's books on famous heroes. Any of them come from Jersey? He asked, pointing to my book. They wouldn't even visit, he continued, eyeballing the cafeteria's entrances. They probably figure we got it so bad, we can't be saved. Stop quoting your mother, I groaned, slapping the book shut and putting it in my bag. And what difference does it make where you come from? What difference? Whether or not you're super, that's the difference, he exclaimed, sipping his soda. I gave him a long look so he'd know just how stupid he was, but I don't think he got the idea. Brad was the only man in a large family of women. His sisters were actually pretty good looking, so it meant sleepovers were a chance to sneak a peek, but unfortunately it also meant Brad didn't know how to communicate without nitpicking or antagonizing. 2 words I had to learn just to try and explain what was wrong with him. So, fine, maybe no heroes have come out of here yet, but I'm gonna. All you're gonna do is get knocked out, he replied, double-checking the side doors in case my attackers tried to sneak in. At least if you run away, they could get tired and give up. Superheroes don't run away. And if you'll excuse me, he stated, stepping back from the table and pointing to something behind me. I swallowed hard and turned around slowly. My arch nemesis, the bane of my existence, Artie, and his retarded gang of abortion-worthy dipshits had shown up just like they said they would. The fight I'd been running from for years was about to have its way with my face. I turned around and swore under my breath. I managed to catch a glimpse of Brad as he ran away and sunk into the crowd gathering around my table. I told him I didn't want a sidekick and that he didn't have to fight. He told me he wasn't my sidekick and that he couldn't fight. Things worked out perfectly. This would be my moment. That is, as long as I actually had superpowers. I feel sorry for your mother, Artie announced as he and his minions stomped their way around front of me. She's not going to have anyone to go down on her after you're dead, he continued, pausing for the crowd of children to laugh at me. I kept my eyes low, looking at the table and clenching my fists under it. I'd put up with Artie through all of elementary and middle school, but I couldn't take it any longer. Only one who's going down is you, I whispered. Artie frowned and took a step forward to stand beside me. He leaned down and lured the corner of my eyes to look at his empty expression and hungry fists. Whatever my powers were, I needed to find out quickly. "You just gonna sit there? Or you gonna do something?" he asked, shoving me so hard I almost flew out of my seat. I glanced at the superhero book poking out of my bag and dug deep inside myself for whatever courage I had. Then, before anyone, or even me, could see it coming, I sprung out of my seat and shot my fist forward like a bullet out of a gun. It landed hard across Artie's jaw, and the whole cafeteria echoed from the smack of my knuckles. But Artie's face didn't even move from the blow, and the echo had come from the sound of my cracking bones. I pulled my throbbing hand back and released a whimper. Artie grinned and grabbed me by the shirt. He lifted me clean over his head and spun me around like a top. I tried grabbing onto his arms in order to get down, but he just kept flinging me around. Eventually, he picked a direction and sent me hurtling across the room. I landed hard on a table and toppled off it onto the ground. Artie was stronger than I'd thought, stronger than made any damn sense to think. It was almost as though Artie was the one who had superpowers. I stood up slowly and wiped someone's pudding off my forehead, but before I could shake the dizziness or figure out where I even stood, Artie was on top of me again. His fists dug into every inch I had showing, faster and harder than jet engine baseball bats. I tried to scream for help, but he kept pounding me before I could form words, letting out high-pitched shrieks instead. The crowd of children stood in shock, unable to believe the beating they were witnessing. I tried every superpower I could think of to keep Artie away from me. Laser eyes, invisibility, web-slinging, telekinesis. But it was no use. I couldn't do anything. Brad was right. I wasn't a superhero. I stopped trying to fight back, stand up, or hold on to my dignity. Artie laughed at my swollen face pressed against the cold cafeteria floor, one eye still open to reassure the crowd that I wasn't dead. But just as Artie pumped his fists in the air, gloating about yet another victory, the walls started to shake, and I felt my cheek flap against the ground. Artie looked anxiously at me, wondering if I were the one making it happen. But I was just as surprised as everybody else. Then, just as the carton of milk vibrated off the table and landed on my head, the cafeteria doors burst inward, and a whirlwind of papers and half-eaten sandwiches filled the air. Everyone ran for cover, ducking under tables with their heads planted tightly over their ears. But as I lay on the ground, squinting and trying to decipher the chaos, I could see a blurry figure walking towards me. "Only bullies bully," a deep voice bellowed, as a shiny pair of golden knee-high boots came to rest beside my head. "Captain Bling!" the crowd of children cried, climbing over one another to get a look at a real-life superhero. "I would have expected more from you," Captain Bling continued, ignoring the crowd and lifting me into the air with one arm. But as my limp body was elevated, I felt every bone I had sink, shattered from the pummeling I'd received. I shrieked like a little girl and wiggled violently to get free. "Wait, you're the one who got beat up?" Captain Bling exclaimed, letting me fall back to the ground as he looked from side to side for the real bully. But Artie was already long gone. Unlike me, he knew better than to mess with someone bigger than him. And unlike me, he hadn't been taught his lesson. 3 weeks later. "Mom, can you scratch my nose again?" I asked, unable to move my arms or legs while in my new full body cast, a souvenir from my fight with Artie. That is, if you can classify getting the crap kicked out of you as a fight. I mean, my doctor said he'd seen bear attack victims with fewer injuries than those I'd received from an angry 13-year-old. "Stanley, I can't wheel you and scratch you. Just try not to think about it," my mother groaned, pushing me forward in the wheelbarrow she'd borrowed from the superintendent. "Why do you even bring me to these stupid places? I'd rather see a movie," I whined, attempting to blow air out of my nose and deflect it off the cast onto the itchy spot. "It's because of movies that you think these places are stupid," she snapped, using my disability as an excuse to frequent art galleries and museums. And I'm not going to let your brain deteriorate entirely while you're away from school. Fine, then can we at least go to the superhero museum? That's an oxymoron, Stanley. Just because a building keeps a bunch of super junk doesn't make it a museum, she growled. My mother hated all superheroes and anything having to do with them. It was probably my fault for having almost killed myself so many times trying to prove I had powers, but then again, I'd been raised Catholic, so I was pretty sure everything was my fault. Oh my mother gasped, placing her hand on her heart and looking anxiously around her. Now, Stanley, I want you to be on your best behavior. Best behavior? I asked, trying to think of what would change while I was in my cast. Why? Oh my God, Lucille. I'm so sorry, I heard a woman's voice exclaim as my mother stepped away from the wheelbarrow to speak to someone. I just can't believe my little bastard would do something so horrible. Don't blame yourself. These kids are crazy nowadays with all the junk the media feeds them, my mother replied as I managed to catch a corner-eye glance of a short, obese woman wearing a yellow summer dress. Audie's mother, complete with a little hellion at her side. You're so kind, Lucille, but really, it's too much. When I heard what my son did to yours, I could barely breathe. I was so angry. I can't imagine how you must have felt, she blathered, pretending to care what her son did or how he tormented me in school. Honestly, I was surprised to hear that he hadn't done it to himself this time. All the kids these days are so enamored by these superheroes that they forgot that they're still only kids. I know! And really, they're nothing more than a bunch of vigilant miscreants with stupid names like Bling or Blang or whatever. It's just ridiculous, Audie's mother agreed. Needless to say, my son won't be doing anything but homework and chores until he's 18 and moves out, she stated, donning a look at Audie, who pouted at his side. Don't you have something to say to Stanley? I got expelled because of you, Audie mumbled angrily. His mother smacked him hard across the back of the head and shoved him towards me so that he could try again. I'm sorry. Eat a dick and die, you retarded chimp, I replied, grinning wide and knowing he couldn't do anything about it. Stanley, my mother shrieked, shaking my wheelbarrow. I'm so sorry. No, it's okay, Audie's mother replied, pulling her son back to her so that he wouldn't take a swing at me. I guess they'll just have to grow up at their own pace. Unfortunately, I think you're right, my mother sighed, looking down at me and shaking her head. In any case, it was good running into you and clearing the air, my mother said, making nice with the enemy. It sure was. Hope to see you at the salon sometime soon. Your next cut's on me, Audie's mother exclaimed as she pulled her son's arm and walked away. Audie glared at me and pumped his fists one final time before disappearing from my range of vision. Are they gone? I asked as my mother began pushing the wheelbarrow to the exit. I cannot believe you sometimes, Stanley. All I asked was for you to be on your best behavior, and you had to go and embarrass me like that. What? How is it embarrassing to treat that putz like he deserves? Two wrongs don't make a right. No, but they do even out. Well, if you're such a wise ass to think that you can talk to people that way, then you got what was coming to you, my mother exclaimed, choosing to take me down the stairs rather than using the elevator. She draped a handkerchief over my face and didn't speak to me until we got home. I'd hope being in a cast would have some benefits, like not having to go to school, do chores, or bathe, but my mother insisted on torturing me by always keeping me away from the TV and out of the house. So when we rolled up to our apartment building to find Brad sitting on the steps waiting for us, I was happy to have an excuse for her to leave me alone. You ran into Audie at the museum? Brad exclaimed. Yeah, you know the jerk got expelled for beating on me? Hopefully now I'll never have to see his rotten face again. Yes, you will, Brad insisted, seated somewhere off to my right. Maybe not soon, but in high school or around the neighborhood, you're going to see him someday. I'll just run away. I thought superheroes don't run. They don't. I'm not super. Artie is. Well, in that case, he'll probably catch up to you and then beat on you even worse for trying to get away. Look, stop being more negative than me. I'm trying to complain, not compete. Oh, whatever. He probably only knows how to fight so good because his dad beats on him so much. Maybe if we had dads around, we'd be tough too. If all you gotta do to be a good fighter is get beaten up, why can't you fight better? The women in your family make you bleed worse than the tampons, I joked, having a good laugh at Brad's expense. He didn't respond. A few seconds later, I could hear him digging around in a nearby desk drawer. What are you doing? Nothing, he stated, uncapping a felt pen and taking a seat beside me. It's not fair. Artie's the biggest prick I've ever met, but he's the one who gets superpowers, I complained, watching the top of Brad's head come in and out of my range of vision. Well, if he ends up becoming a superhero, at least we can say we knew him. It figures that that'll be what happens. None of the new heroes are as good as the old ones. Like that moron Captain Bling, I grumbled as Brad, distracted by what he was scribbling, began to giggle. What are you doing? I repeated, squinting out of the corner of my eye at the transparent reflection in the window. I'm drawing on your cast, he exclaimed, moving to my other leg. What are you drawing? You'll see, he snickered as my mother walked in, holding a funnel in one hand and an instant meal in the other. Stanley, it's time for your lunch, she announced, taking a seat beside me and dropping the funnel into my mouth hole. I bit onto it and blinked twice so she'd know I was ready. So, Brad, how's your mother doing? She's all right. That's not what I heard, my mother said, opening my can of lunch and pouring a mouthful into my funnel. She says she's been going out of her mind trying to keep your grades up. Yeah, Brad mumbled, unable to escape his mother's lectures even at my house. I have to hear about it every time I talk to her, my mother continued, periodically tipping her wrist to give me a mouthful. Maybe you two shouldn't talk so much then, Brad stated, his wishful thinking getting the better of his common sense. My mother gave him an unimpressed look that she'd learned about from her best friend, Brad's mother. Or maybe you should own up to your responsibilities and apply yourself in school. Hey, it's not like I'm the only one having a problem. The whole school's grades have dropped. So really, I'm just doing the same as before. Just because everyone else in your school is a screw-up doesn't mean it's okay for you to be, she lectured, pausing her pour as I choked on the liquid, laughing at Brad. I'm not kidding! The entire school's grades have gone down since the beginning of the year. No exceptions. Oh, no? What about Stanley? She stated, crossing her arms to emphasize her point. She was right. While in the cast, my homework grades have remained the same as always. Average. Of course he's gonna do good. Only thing he's got is homework, Brad retorted. Too much of a retard to know not to argue with my mother. She crushed the now empty can of liquid food she'd been feeding me and let it fall to the ground. Brad's eyes dropped with it, and he realized shutting up couldn't save him now. Well, if being in a cast keeps your grades up, I might just have a solution for your mother, she exclaimed, scaring some sense into Brad. Yes, ma'am, he muttered, keeping his eyes to the ground as my mother exited the room. She closed the door, and Brad resumed drawing on my cast. I'm really not kidding, Stan. The whole school's gone retarded. The principal's hired some specialist to investigate what's the matter. I even had to sit down and talk to one yesterday. What did he say? Nothing. He just asked me questions. Like what? Like, am I upset to hear that the Fantastic Four are retiring, or am I depressed about the school's recent slump in sporting events? He explained, leaning over me so he could draw on my chest. What sports slump? I asked, recalling the pride and joy of our school, a glorified batch of athletes that had managed to go undefeated for more than a year in every sport. Our teams, they haven't won anything for almost a month now. They suck. Meanwhile, 5 floors down from Stanley and Brad, old Miss Easton sat watching an especially boring episode of an already boring show. Her cigarette dangled from her lip and fluttered with her every breath. She hadn't stood up all day and hadn't left her apartment all week. She was tired, and as she often did, had fallen asleep in her chair. Her cigarette slowly burnt away, eventually falling from her mouth and landing on her muumuu. There it lay, sizzling over the commercial break, only to ignite as Miss Easton stirred awake. She jumped to her feet and tugged at her dress, but her wrinkly blubber made it hard to act quickly or remove her gown. She cried out as the burning garment became stuck around her neck. After a few short tugs, she managed to pry it free and throw it aside, but as Miss Easton quickly realized, the fire had spread to her hair. Panicked, naked, and disoriented, she ran for help, leaving her smoldering dress on a pile of garbage. The fire spread, and the alarm sounded. "What the hell is that?" Brad asked, turning his attention to a loud ringing coming from outside the apartment. But before I could respond, my mother burst into the room, wheelbarrow and all. "Hurry up! We've got to get Stanley into the elevator while it still works," she yelled, reacting to the alarm as though there were actually a fire. Brad rolled his eyes and stood up slowly. He knew better than to argue with her again. But we'd both been through too many false alarms at school to take the situation seriously. "Mom, it's probably just another burnt roast," I complained as she rushed over to me. She pulled on the bed sheet I lay on in order to slide me into the wheelbarrow, but for the most part all she did was slide herself around the bed. "Don't give me any attitude, mister," she cried, frantically shifting her weight to guide me into the wheelbarrow. "Are you going to help me, or what?" she shouted, staring angrily at Brad. "Mom, seriously, why do you gotta get so riled up anytime you think something might go wrong? One more word out of you and you're grounded," she threatened as Brad lazily helped her pull me into the wheelbarrow. "What difference is grounding him gonna do? He can't even move," Brad muttered as my mother rushed me out of the apartment and into the hall. She stopped in front of the elevator and repeatedly pushed a button. "Do you smell smoke?" Brad asked, frowning and raising his nose in the air. I opened my mouth to say he was even more like my mother than his own, but quickly realized he was right. I could smell smoke. And suddenly, I had a whole other reason for wishing I had superpowers. Come on," my mother repeated, staring up at the numbers displayed above the elevator as it slowly climbed to our level. But as the doors opened, a cloud of smoke spewed out of the elevator and blinded us. Brad and my mother backed away, coughing and covering their eyes. I wheezed hard and tried my best to fall aside, but I couldn't move. I was trapped in my cast with nothing to do but piss myself. Fortunately, I already had a catheter. "Oh, shit!" Brad yelled as he noticed the buttons inside the elevator had begun to melt. "Watch your language!" my mother yelled, quickly wheeling me towards the window at the end of the hall. She hacked at the rusty locks and managed to open a big enough crack for Brad to fit through. "Get to safety and call for help." I don't have a phone," Brad replied as my mother shoved him so he'd stop moving. "I meant call for superheroes." "Which one?" My mother snarled and leaned out the window, grabbing Brad by the collar and extending him to the edge of the fire escape. "Run and get help, or I swear to God, I'll kill you myself," she growled. "Yes, ma'am," Brad whimpered, quickly descending the fire escape as my mother swiveled back inside. She gave me a look of complete desperation and determination. I could tell she'd do whatever it took to get me to safety. But I also knew there wasn't anything she could do. She pulled me away from the smoke coming out of the elevator and parked me by the stairwell. She opened the door and peeked inside, the sound of panicked people echoing up to our floor. "Mom, you should go," I said as I noticed a trickle of smoke outside of the fire escape window. She gave me an aggravated look, so I'd stop talking and let her think. In the distance, we could hear Brad's shrill cries for help. "Spider! Bat! Super! Whoever's working this neighborhood, come on! We need some help here!" And even further away, I could hear the sounds of sirens heading in our direction. But neither calmed my mother's nerves enough to keep her from trying to save me, all by herself. She rushed to my wheelbarrow and awkwardly tilted me over so that I'd fall onto her. "Are you crazy?" I yelled, my eye holes turning to the ceiling as I came to rest on my mother's back. "Shut up, Stanley!" she shrieked, taking heavy steps towards the stairwell. But as she poked our heads towards the stairs, I could feel the heat pulsing up and the smoke spiraling past us. We were trapped. My mother pivoted back and used the wall for balance. She turned back and forth, looking for any other option, but could only see the fire escape she'd sent Brad down earlier. She didn't hesitate long before heading in that direction. "Mom, this is nuts!" I protested as she fought with the window to get it open all the way. A second later, I heard the glass shatter before I was raised up another foot in the air. I know you're trying to save me, but I don't want to die. The sky came into view as my mother crawled out onto the fire escape, still supporting me on her back. The smoke poured up past us, and I could see other people looking out their windows shouting for help. I heard fire trucks pull up and more people yelling from below. Then, as my mother began descending the fire escape, I could hear the sound of moaning and squeaking metal. I wondered if building inspections included fire escapes and whether or not following in my cast meant a better chance of surviving. It never even occurred to me that my mother was managing just fine. That is until the fire escape broke free of the brick wall and swung out over the open street. In fact, at that point, I was pretty sure I was gonna die. Yeah, I definitely thought I was gonna die. Everything's okay, my mother yelled at me as I slid down to the floor grating and lodged up against the railing. I could see my mom now, breathing heavily as she pulled herself towards me at a steep angle. The fire trucks below us extended their ladders, and firemen scrambled up to keep us from falling. But the fire escape was shaking, and with every passing second, we got closer to falling the full 7 stories down to the ground. Hold on, my mother instructed arbitrarily, grabbing onto the arm of my cast and flipping me like a coin back onto her back. The kind of strength I'd only dreamed about. And that for whatever reason, my mother just happened to have? Whoa! I cried, practically filling my catheter as I now lay face down on my mother's back, peeking over her shoulder. She hung from the mangled fire escape with one hand and clung to me with the other. But as the ladder came almost to within reach of us, I could feel the fire escape give way. I held my breath as my mother burst forward, catching me with one hand as I toppled off her back. Then, with a firm grip on me, she reached out her other hand and grabbed onto the ladder. The fire escape came crashing down behind us as windows exploded into waves of smoke, pouring out into the street while firefighters flooded the building. The crowd that had gathered stood stunned as the ladder was retracted, and my mother and I were placed safely on the ground. Emergency workers huddled around us, taking my mother and me aside to make sure we were okay. Are you injured? The EMT asked, checking my mother's arms for cuts or burns. No, I'm fine, she replied, double-checking me as the emergency workers huddled around her, shrugging their shoulders and scratching their heads. Are you okay, sweetie? She whispered, leaning in close enough to my eye hole so that she blocked out the rest of the world. I blinked twice, and she smiled before turning her attention back to the medical team. Are you a registered superhero? One of the firemen asked, as the crowd quieted down to hear my mother say what everyone else was wondering. She grinned and shook her head. Nah, I'm a dedicated mother. 2 weeks later. I got the cast off just after my mother finished her spiel on every talk show in the country. The public had a great interest in the idea of Super Mother, as she'd come to be known. Unfortunately, her fame also meant pictures of me were all over the city in a full-body cast that Brad had vandalized to look like a transvestite mummy. And even more unfortunately, pictures were all over my locker, too. I almost died, I snapped, tearing the blanket of posters off my locker door. Does no one take that seriously? No one with a sense of humor, Brad replied. You want to hear your new nickname, or would you rather be in denial? Why does everybody but me get superpowers? First my nemesis, now my mother. What's next, my goldfish? Your new nickname is Mummy Tampon. But to abbreviate, people just call you Tampon. I never thought I'd realize what real life was like while I was still a kid. This is so depressing, I groaned, letting my head fall against a locker as a group of girls walked by, pointing and laughing. What teenagers? This is what happens, Brad remarked, watching the girls walk away. I grabbed my change of clothes and quickly turned down the hall to get to the gym. Brad followed a few feet behind me, but talked loudly enough so that I could still hear him. What's the rush? Don't tell me you like phys ed now. I like being able to move my arms and legs again, I growled, passing yet another wall littered with pictures of me. I pushed through the navy blue double doors of the gym to reveal a gaggle of kids wearing shorts longer than their legs, and just as I expected, they all turned to laugh at me. Brad put his hand on my shoulder, shook his head, and sighed. Don't let him get to you. Your mother could take all of them, he remarked, trying not to laugh. I glared angrily at him for a moment before heading into the change room. When we came back out, Our gym teacher, Mr. Boren, stood with his arms crossed waiting for us. We took our place among the other kids and waited to hear what arbitrary physical task we'd be performing today.
All right. Shut up, everybody,
Mr. Boren snapped, echoing over the herd of prepubescent voices.
As we all learned last week, the state requires a physical fitness assessment once a year. However, due to how extraordinarily you all managed to suck at that assessment, they have agreed to allow a do-over, he yelled, making me feel less pathetic by comparison. Now everybody get in line and don't screw up.
What's up his ass? Brad whispered as we all shuffled together into a line. Half the fun in this school gets is because of how good our sports teams are, I explained, recalling a conversation I'd overheard between some teachers. If that changes, he'll probably get fired.
No talking,
Mr. Boren shouted, rolling a bin full of equipment towards us.
Anyone who passes today gets to swear as much as they want for the rest of the year, he said, handed out skipping ropes to each of us in line. Now 5 minutes, no stopping.
We all lazily began skipping while staring at the clock. But as usual, everyone else performed like Olympic athletes while all I could do was sputter and wheeze. I must be getting in better shape. This was a bitch last week, Brad exclaimed, speaking normally even though he was skipping 10 times a second. This is ridiculous, I huffed, barely able to jump, let alone skip. Maybe people are so lazy nowadays because they grow up being punished with physical activity. Maybe you see this as punishment because you're so lazy, Brad replied as Mr. Boren paced up and down the line of kids, clipboard in hand. But when he came to me, his frown turned to a scowl, and he shook his head.
Pick it up, tampon,
he yelled, quickly moving along to compliment the more physically fit children. Shortly after the excruciating 5 minutes of skipping, everyone else in my class excelled at climbing rope while I struggled to get a good grip without cutting into my hands. Then, everyone ran a mile in less than a minute, while it took me almost 15. And just as I sputtered to the finish line, tasting blood and sweating bullets, Mr. Boren dropped a shot put into my flimsy arms and pointed to where everyone else had managed to throw theirs. Way past the school's baseball diamond and into the parking lot down the block. My mouth dropped, and I furrowed my brow, trying to contemplate how it was possible for everyone to always be so much better at everything than I was. I let the shot put fall to my feet as my eyes filled with tears. As the class erupted into squeals of laughter, Mr. Boren took it upon himself to give me his version of a pep talk.
Look, I can see you're trying, but mostly you're just embarrassing yourself. If you want to give up, it's okay. Everyone else has performed well enough that it won't affect the curve. And since I'm a fan of your mother's, I'll pass you anyway.
He gave me a sleazy smile like he hoped I'd let my mother know what a great guy he was. Then he turned back to the horde of super children that he'd probably force-fed steroids to so he could keep his job. Brad shuffled over to me with a confused look on his face and picked up the shot put I dropped. Then, without even trying, he flung his arm forward and sent the metal ball flying hundreds of feet in the air. You ever notice that everyone but you in our gym class has superhuman strength? He asked, saying it as though he'd just realized it himself. It's part of why I'm so depressed, I sighed, picking up another shot put and trying my best to throw it further than my arms reach. I guess I'll just have to learn to live with everyone else having what I want. Stan, when you were away in your cast, the whole school got dumber. The sports team sucked, and your mother turned into a superhero, he exclaimed, giving me a long look so I'd know just how stupid I was. Yeah, so? So? He gasped, slapping the back of my head the way his mother would do to him anytime his brain stopped working. I know I'm supposed to be the dumb one, Stan, but I think I figured it out. What? Figured what out? What your superpower is. Brad's idea was crazy. It was horrifying. So unbelievably unexpected and depressing that all I could do was shake my head and hope that the thought would fall out. But he wouldn't shut up about it. He was so sure he was right that as we walked home from school, he stopped at every car to lift it off the ground and laugh. He bent parking meters like they were warm licorice and repeatedly jumped 50 feet in the air, expecting me to wait for him to come back down. And when we finally got back home to find my mother halfway through making dinner, Brad couldn't help but share his thoughts on how everyone else's superpowers were only around when I was. Bradley, go home, my mother insisted, undoing her apron and abandoning supper. Look, I can prove it, he continued, picking me up and raising me above his head. Put me down, I shouted, slapping the sides of his rock-hard head. Bradley, put him down, my mother demanded, planting her fists on her hips. This isn't normal, Mrs. J, Brad exclaimed as my mother snatched me out of his hands and put me down beside her. I can't do this kind of stuff when Stan's not around. And yet you seem to think you can get away with it when I'm around? My mother snarled, grabbing Brad by the ear and pulling him to the door. Go home and go to your room, she ordered, slamming the door behind him before turning slowly to address me. How was school? She asked, avoiding eye contact as she resumed making dinner. Everyone's smarter and stronger now that I'm back, I replied, sitting down at the kitchen table and dropping my head into my hands. I'm sure you're exaggerating. I got a nice discount on a new iron today when the clerk recognized me, she said, clearing her throat and stirring some spaghetti sauce. Mom, did you even hear what Brad just said? I sent him home, didn't I? Yeah, but you always do that. I think he's right. Nonsense. Now, they were out of spicy tomato at the grocery store, so you'll have to make do without it, she exclaimed, shrugging off my superpowers like I was talking about baseball cards. Mom, I'm a superhero who doesn't have any powers. Where's the fun in that? I whined as my mother put down a spoon and gave an exasperated sigh. Stanley, what did I tell you about talking about superheroes? I'm not talking about superheroes. I'm talking about me. You're not a superhero, Stanley. Now, what kind of homework did you get for this evening? She asked in a frustrated tone. You really don't think I'm a superhero? I snapped as she shot me a dirty look just for asking the question. Fine, I muttered, standing up and walking behind her. I skimmed over a few items, knives, meat mallets, and dishes before deciding on a cast iron pan. Then, after a moment's hesitation to kiss my social life goodbye, I swung it down hard onto my mother's back. Stanley! She screamed, turning around and snatching the now dented pan out of my hands. What the hell do you think you're doing? See? You didn't even cringe. I do give everyone around me superpowers. No, you don't. That really hurt, she yelled, giving me the same scrunched-up face she always did when she tried to lie. That's a load of crap, I stated, calling her bluff. Watch your language. Don't change the subject. I'm a superhero, Mom. Accept it. I've had enough of this super nonsense from you, she raged, bending the dented pan back into its original shape. Your entire life, it's been nothing but, look how I almost died today, Mom. Look how I cut up all your sheets to make a costume, Mom. Well, I'm sick and tired of it, she shouted, slamming the pan down onto the kitchen table, inadvertently smashing it into a mangled heap of metal. I looked down at the twisted pile of what was once my mother's favorite table, and then up at her scrunched expression. You already knew, didn't you? That's ridiculous. Why else would you risk our lives out on the fire escape when you could see the fire trucks were already there? I exclaimed, trying to remember any time in my life when my mother had gotten hurt or sick. Stanley, don't think that... Is that why you hate superheroes so much? No, of course not. Then why wouldn't you tell me about my powers? Why did you always badmouth every superhero any chance you got? I continued, asking every question I could to try and get her to tell me the truth. She kept her eyes to the ground and rubbed her arm nervously. Why can't you just be honest with me? I finished, using her own guilt-milking line against her. She looked anywhere but at me, unsure of what to say. Then, after a few silent moments, she sat in a chair beside our smashed table and took a deep breath. You're right. I knew. I've known since you were just a baby, she admitted, taking my hand in hers and guiding me into the next seat to her. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but, well, I guess you're old enough now that you can handle the truth. Mom, I'm practically a grown-up. You have to have more faith in me, I replied, wondering why she wouldn't let go of my hand. Okay, Stanley, if you say so, she sighed, making a face like her words were gonna make her puke. Captain Bling is your father. Dude, guess what? Brad exclaimed, rushing up to me just seconds after I exited my apartment building to walk to school. Whatever it is, I don't care, I replied, now appreciating what depression really was. Captain Bling, the dumbest, gaudiest of all superheroes, was my father. But I have good news, Brad stated, watching me fish around in my lunch bag for my chocolate milk. Do me a favor and don't talk the rest of the way to the school, I sighed, slamming back my milk without even wiping off the mustache afterwards. But I'm serious, Brad. Stanley Roosevelt James, Brad said, determined to annoy me. Shut up, I'm trying to ignore you. You're popular, dude, he announced as we passed the corner store down the street from our school. What are you talking about? You're like the coolest kid in school now, which makes me the second coolest kid for being your best friend. My nickname's Tampon, Brad. I'm not popular. Not anymore, it's not. Now it's Super Nobody. What? Yeah, because you're a nobody who makes everyone else super, he said, smacking me on the back as though I should be as enthused as him. Wait, you told people that I'm a superhero? I yelled, grabbing 2 fistfuls of my hair and bulging my eyes out of my head. Are you retarded? What are you spazzing out for? Now everyone at school wants to be your friend. Yeah, but only because I'll give them superpowers, I snapped, stopping just outside of our school steps. Didn't you think about what a disaster it'll be letting a few hundred kids know that they all have superpowers? Stan, you're missing the point. We're popular now, he exclaimed, just as a gaggle of kids pointed to me and yelled, he's here. Then they all turned screaming into the school so that everyone else would know I'd arrived. I let my jaw drop and slapped my hand on my forehead. A few moments later, I heard a low grumble coming from inside the school, shaking the sidewalk and the cars on the street. I think I'll save time and go straight to the principal's office, I muttered, watching kids explode out of the walls of the school, flying 100 feet in the air without any sense of direction. Other kids who'd just been dropped off picked up their parents' cars and shook them around like baby rattles, while another group of delinquents ripped up parking meters and had a sword fight with them. I shook my head and walked sullen and annoyed into the school. Brad trotted along behind me, waving hello to all the girls that wouldn't talk to him the day before. This is great, he said, jumping out of the way as someone's laser vision cut a row of lockers in half. Why are you being so whiny? Because I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be the one who gets in trouble for all of this, I growled, stepping over the crumpled remains of a water fountain before turning the corner down the principal's office. But as I looked down the hall full of kids playing with their newfound powers, I noticed a familiar scowl pointed my way. Artie was back. He must have heard about my powers and came looking for his revenge. Oh, shit, I gasped. What now? Brad groaned, rolling his eyes. Brad, you gotta fly me out of here or something, I shrieked, attempting to jump into his arms and mooch off his superpowers. Stop rubbing up against me. We just got popular, he said, catching eye of what I was so scared of. Oh, shit.
You got me expelled,
Artie screamed, shoving kids out of the way as he barged down the hall towards us.
You knew I'd have super strength around you, and you knew I'd get expelled for using it against you.
No, I swear I didn't know, I protested, backing down the hall, looking for a place to hide. Halt! Brad exclaimed, attempting to rescue me by getting in Artie's way. But since Artie was still nearly twice Brad's size, it only took one hard shove to send him flying through a wall. I turned and ran, dodging projectile desks and kids learning to fly.
I'm gonna beat on you even worse for trying to get away, Artie shouted,
swiping at my shirt as I ducked into the boiler room entrance, tumbling down the stairs and smacking against the wall. Artie, please, I'll do anything. I mean, wouldn't it make more sense for us to get along? I babbled, trying to think of how to keep him from beating me to death. That way you'd have superpowers all the time, and I wouldn't die.
Shut up,
he yelled, taking a swing at me. I ducked and fell to the ground just in time to see Artie's fist miss my head and slam into the wall. He tugged and shook to get his arm free, but as a jet of steam shot out of the wall, I could see he'd wedged his hand into a pipe. He squinted and snarled, blindly swinging his arms in my direction. I gasped and trembled, trapped below him and unable to run. But as he planted his legs apart to pry his arm free, I took the only shot in hell anyone has when fighting someone bigger than them. I kicked him in the nuts, repeatedly. He crumpled against the wall, now using his free arm to clasp his swollen testicles. I scurried out from under him and ran up the stairs, listening to him howl behind me. When I got to the top of the stairs and into the school, I saw empty halls littered with debris, but now there were no kids, not a single one. I cocked my head back and squinted, thinking that maybe Artie had killed me and school would be my haunting grounds for the rest of my afterlife. But as I heard a moan come from beside me, I noticed a crumpled pile of bricks with two legs sticking out. Ow! Why did I think I could fight? Brad groaned as I stuck my arms into the pile to help him up. Because you thought you were a superhero, I replied, looking both ways down the hall for any sign of anybody. I am a superhero, he coughed, removing a chunk of concrete from his mouth. No, being a superhero means acting like one. Otherwise, you're just some idiot with special abilities. Stop quoting your mother, he said, making the same bewildered face as me. Where'd everyone go? I don't know. But they must have left in a hurry, I exclaimed, double-checking every classroom as we walked down the hall towards the principal's office. Hello? Hello?
Hello, Stanley.
A deep voice growled as a cold hand squeezed my shoulder. Brad's face went white, and I could see a wet spot start to grow in his pants. I turned my neck to the side to see a black cape flicker against a crimson metal suit, an ensemble I recognized, but not from a superhero. Oh, shit, I gasped, realizing that my classmates were the least of my troubles. After all, where there are superheroes, there are supervillains. Meanwhile, Stanley's father, Captain Bling, had just received word of his son's abilities, as had nearly the entire city. A mad rush had begun for anyone seeking superpowers of their own, for the world had never known anyone to be as powerful or potentially dangerous as this. Stanley was now a superhero. Super nobody. To be continued.